The 2017 hurricane season has been devastating. First Harvey, now Irma. Today I'm talking to Heather Zons, a Weather Channel weather producer and a University of Miami alumna. She's in Atlanta, and I'm going to be asking her what we can expect from Irma in the coming days.
Hi, Heather. Thank you for taking the time to talk with me today. I'm sure it's a very busy time for you.
It is, definitely.
We've heard Irma being described using words like unprecedented. It's even been said that it's the strongest storm to ever form in the Atlantic. We've seen the wreckage in the Caribbean and comparisons to previous storms like Andrew. What specifically has made Irma so strong?
Well, there are a lot of different factors, and I'm personally not going to get into any regarding climate change because people have their own opinions about that, and that's something to discuss at a later time, but we're more focused on how Irma is going to be impacting people's lives in the next 48 hours, or less than 48 hours, really. So it's kind of hard to describe what Irma has become, other than we are just like flabbergasted as a meteorology community and as a company. Going from Harvey, we would always be using like terms like unprecedented, catastrophic, life-threatening, but Harvey was a totally different beast entirely, and we're already using those words for Irma, and she hasn't even begun. So there's still a long way to go, and Irma might even bring tropical storm force conditions to parts of Atlanta and Nashville, which is crazy to think about, but we have to get through Florida first, and that's what we're mainly worried about.
You talk about Florida, and there's been a lot of uncertainty when it comes to forecasting how Irma will impact the state of Florida. The entire state is bracing for the storm, but now that we're one day closer, what can we expect?
As the meteorologist, we're looking at multiple different models, not just the NHC. We are looking into the NHC for guidance, but we have some models at our disposal. And at the beginning, when Irma was just forming and gaining steam, and we saw like, oh, the models are kind of pointing towards Florida a little bit. And then every so often, like every new model run or every 24 hours, we would be like, oh, it's coming back into play. And it kept flip-flopping back and forth for probably about 3 days. And then now that we're so much closer, you see the cone today, and it's pretty much the entire peninsula of Florida is within the cone. Now, that means very many different things, and people do forget that the full name is the cone of uncertainty. So, because we are uncertain about exactly where Irma will track, where the center of Irma will track. And people also forget that, you know, impacts are going to be felt far outside the cone, but it's going to be catastrophic within the cone. So even if Irma takes a western track, that'll still be very devastating for Miami, Orlando, and even to Jacksonville, because the storm is massive. And like you said in your earlier question, comparing it to Andrew was very small in comparison to Irma. And Andrew also just went from east to west, where Irma is going south to north. So Florida is definitely a very long state compared to a very wide state. So it's going to be catastrophic for sure, which terrifies all of us.
Yesterday, Governor Scott was stressing that Irma is bigger than our entire state.
Yep.
And of course, that's making everyone here very nervous. A lot of people are panicking. People are taking evacuation orders seriously, so that's good news.
That is good.
But what is making this storm so unpredictable?
To preface, there is currently very dry air in parts of the southeast right now, in a sense that like places like Charlotte, Atlanta, Greenville, they've set record cold lows in the mornings. And because that air is so cold with that front, and we have to time out exactly when that front is going to interact with Irma. And when it does, that's why Irma is going to make this sharp turn to the north. And that's why we don't know exactly if Irma is going to track up the west coast of Florida or the east coast of Florida. So it all depends on when that turn is going to happen. And that really does change exactly the impacts that each city will feel. Taking Miami, for example, if Irma goes up the west coast of Florida, Miami will be in the northeast quadrant of the storm, which is historically the most dangerous part of the storm. But if Irma tracks right on top of Miami along the east coast, then they'll obviously be right in the eye wall, and they'll be getting record-breaking storm surge. Regardless of what track it takes, it's really going to test, the entire city of Miami.
So what is the best case scenario we're looking at here?
The best case scenario is if that front moves faster than anticipated and Irma makes her turn northward sooner than getting to Florida. So that means Miami would be hit with the western part of the storm, which would not be as impactful. And then also the west coast of Florida would mostly be spared. Now, to be fair, that whole peninsula of Florida is still going to be feeling hurricane force wind gusts and tropical storm force winds of 45 to 60 miles an hour.
Now, because I have to ask, what's our worst case scenario?
The worst case scenario is what some models are currently putting out, in the sense that Irma would make the northward turn directly over Key Largo. If Irma goes over the Keys, and then the rest of the worst case scenario would be just tracking due north across the entire peninsula. So Miami would be getting the northeast quadrant, which would have horrible storm surge and winds, and then the eye wall would just track all the way north.
When are we going to start feeling the effects of Irma in Florida?
Florida is already seeing wave heights close to 10 feet, even today, because it's currently Irma is currently over the Bahamas. And swells are really going to start picking up tonight in parts of southeastern Florida. And people in South Florida, if they are choosing to stay, which I highly do not recommend to do, if they choose to stay, they have to rush their preparations to completion tonight and then make sure they are in their homes safe by midnight tonight, because that's when, at 8 a.m. tomorrow is when the tropical storm force winds are going to be approaching South Florida. And you may think, oh, only the tropical storm force winds, that's fine. It's not fine, because if you're trying to nail plywood hurricane shutters onto your windows or something last minute, and you're dealing with 40 mile per hour winds, that's not going to happen. You're not going to be able to put your shutters up. You're going to panic, and it's just not going to be a good scenario. So tomorrow morning is when impacts are going to be felt in parts of South Florida.
What are some common myths that people often think about during hurricanes that can actually put them more in harm's way?
So one of the most common things that people have asked me about preparing for this storm is, should I open up my windows and doors in order to equalize the pressure in my home so the winds aren't as damaging to my house? And it's such a myth. That is a terrible, terrible decision. Do not do that, because once the winds all rush in through those windows and doors, the only way that they can go is up through your house, because they're already clogging up all the windows and doors. So they rush in, rush up, and blast the roof off of your home, and then you're left with just 4 walls and no roof. So you'd be in an even worse position than you were in before. So definitely do not do that. And another myth that I've been asked before is, should I put duct tape on my windows? And there is also no credibility to that myth either.
Lastly, what are your words of advice for anyone in Irma's path? I've
been telling people on social media and anybody who reaches out to me when they ask me what they should do, the first thing I tell them to do is to stay calm, because making rash decisions when you're panicked is not good for anybody, you, your family, or anybody around you. So you just have to stay calm when making these decisions. Some people may think that we're overhyping it, and if Irma does track along the East Coast and you live on the West Coast and the impacts are not as bad for you, and you're going to think, oh, we overhyped it. People say that all the time. But you have to think about how many people live in South Florida. That area of Florida has seen a population boom ever since the last major hurricane that went through there, Wilma, in 2005. They have seen, I think it's an increase of 3 million more people, which is like a 20% increase about what it was in 2005. So those people all have to go somewhere, and they're so densely packed in there. If one home isn't properly barricaded and it falls apart, it's all going to become projectiles and debris that could hurt somebody else. So everyone has to stay calm and make proper decisions, because it's going to impact everyone around you, whether you don't realize it or not.
Well, that's a lot to process and think about. And thank you again for taking the time to talk. This is going to be a big one. And in South Florida, we're hoping for the best.
We are too.
Thank you. Bye-bye.